Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are looking at this particular session today. We will be talking about the implementation plan using the Felder-Silverman model and leveraging the learning styles for effective education. Now, see, I always have believed over the years that the implementation plan for any model. You talk about Kolb model, you talk about Malcolm Knowles or any other model. It particularly features on the thought process of the person is going to use it, because you are not Richard Felder or you are not Linda Silverman who created this model. What was their thought process, the actual model? What we get is the outcome, because we can never go back to that time and try to find out what was their actual cognitive thought process, what did they think about while creating this model. We can only venture into what they wrote. We can always venture into what they tried to accomplish from this, and then you can create your own thought process and you can use that model into the way you want to use it. So there is no hard and fast rule that you need to use. At the end of the day, when you are looking at any other model, the same as Felder-Silverman model, it's exactly the way they have created it, right? So for example, if you're looking at Kolbe model, again, exactly the way David Kolb has created it. So to understand that in a better way, let us first understand who Felder and Silverman is and was, because Linda Silverman passed away on 15th of January 2024. Dr. Richard Felder is still continuing the research on everything. Now, back in around 1970s and 80s, Dr. Richard Felder was a professor for chemical engineering in North Carolina State University. Please understand that if you're an engineering professor, you are teaching models, cohorts, designs. It's very theoretical by nature. That's what I know. And because of that very theoretical in nature way of delivering a program, Felder always wanted to create something, which is very different, where the learner experience is better. Because typically, if you go to an engineering college, people do attend lectures only which lectures they like. They don't get into every lecture, which probably they get notes from other people in the study, which Dr. Richard Felder thought about it. Why not every people should come to the lecture? Because everybody who's sharing that knowledge has their own way of doing it. So he joined hand with Linda Silverman. Now, Felder being a chemical engineer professor, Linda Silverman was more of a behavioral psychologist, or rather educator or an educationist. So when they two joined hands together, they came up with the Felder-Silverman model. Although this came in 1988, David Kolb has already created an adult learning model, but Felder and Silverman was more from an education institute. So whatever changes you see today in the IIMs and the IITs, to a certain extent, it's my thought process or my belief that they might have been influenced from that model, and they are doing well from that model, because there are a lot of practical applications happens in IIM Ahmedabad or IIM Bangalore or IIM Calcutta. The reason we say this is because it comes from an effective education, and it's also the learning styles. The commonality between these two models, Kolb and Felder-Silverman, is that it talks about learner experience. That's the ideology of it. So let us dig deep, dive in well, understand the implementation plan. So the way we are going to do it is we'll try to do a quick overview of the Felder-Silverman model. We'll try to assess the learning styles. We'll try and design an instructional strategy. We'll try to implement the plan framework, and then we'll evaluate and the implementation part. That's what typically is the outline of today's session. So the first is overview of the Felder-Silverman model. Felder-Silverman model talked about or spoke about, four distinct way a learner experiences information. So he and Linda Silverman never came up with the idea that this is what it should be. Rather, they experience that every learner, when they process a new information or they process an old information, they typically go in this way. The first is, how do you process information? Information is coming to you, so you might be thinking that whether I should take it or not, I should give it or not. The second one is, how do you perceive emotion? So when you say perceive emotion, what it says is, for example, is this information needed by me, whether I should take this information or keep it or let it float around. So it's more of how do I perceive. Then comes what will be the input mechanism. So if I'm looking at something, shall I go ahead and look from a perspective of a visual image that gives me, wow, this image looks good, it's so beautiful, I can keep it for my future learning purpose. Or it can be verbal. And the final one is, how do learners understand those information? So if you look at it as PPIU, I typically call it the PPIU way of thinking. So how do learner process information? How do learner perceive information? What is the input of this information from the learner perspective? And finally, how do learner understand information? Now, this is the 4-domain model. Now, under the 4-domain model, further ahead, Felder and Silverman went ahead and spoke about the various learners that come in these domains. So for the processing information, he said that there will be an active learner, there will be a reflective learner. So who are the active learners? Who prefer hands-on experience, who wants to learn by doing it, who learns to actively participate. And who are the respective learners? Who are the reflective learners? Reflective learners are those who get into kind of before they want to do, they want to know. They want to get into the deep of it. They wanted to get into the theoretical aspect of it. So very simple. Gabriel want to do a case study by directly doing a role play. Gabriel too wants to do a role play, but before that he wants to understand the case study first. So that's an active learner versus reflective learner. So how do a learner process information is divided into two, active and reflective. Now, how do a learner perceive information? They perceive information by sensing, or they perceive information by their intuition. Now, when I say intuition, intuition is like, okay, if this is, so for example, if I look like this, then Gabriel can be like this. So those are intuitive learners. Sensing learner is they focus more on concrete facts. If A is equal to B, then B is equal to C. I mean, the famous equation that I can put in out there. So how am I sensing and how am my intuition working is based on the learning style is done. The input is typically from a visual. So if visual learner is there, they will prefer images and diagrams. They will get into more of like visionary purposes, what I see, what I'm able to see and grasp from it. And the verbal learners, they will more get into the spoken explanations. They will listen to a faculty, they'll listen to a facilitator, they'll listen to somebody who is at the higher level, how they are speaking, what they are speaking, how they are connecting the dots, and all those things. And then comes how you understand the information. It creates two ways, that is called the sequential and the global learners. So sequential learner are all those things, they prepare a logical step. So I'll complete level 1, then I'll go to level 2, I'll complete level 2, then I'll go to level 3, I'll complete level 3, then I'll go to level 4. A global learner is more like, okay, what is the outcome? Why am I doing it? What's the big picture around it? That is how it goes. So if we can go back once again, how do learners process information? How do learner perceives information? So how do learner process information gives the category as active and reflective learners. How do learners perceive information gives me two sense, is the sensing learners and intuitive learners. How do you input the learning? So there is a visual learner and a verbal learner. And finally, how do learners understand information is through sequential and global. Now the question is, whether can you find a mix that there are some people who are visual and verbal both? Possibly yes. Can you find some people who are sequential and global both? Possibly yes. However, according to the theory, it says that these two are distinct learners. I mean, most of the times a global learner will focus on the bigger picture or a holistic outcome or a holistic learning model than a logical step. Okay, verbal learners are more pertaining towards the spoken explanations, while the visual learners are more from what they see. The active learners would prefer more on doing it rather than waiting to understand what it means. And the reflective learners is exactly the opposite. The sensing learners will always focus on facts, logics, and other things, and intuitive learners will always focus on the patterns and underlying concepts. So once again, reiterating, how do learner process information gives me active and reflective learners. How do learner perceive information gives me sensing and intuitive learners. How do learners do our input of their learning is visual and verbal learners, and how do learners understand the information gives me sequential and global learners. Now this is the basic model. I don't want to take a big diverge factors into all these things. What are the key components of these dimensions? It is like recognizing the learner dimensions, the process, the perception, the input, and the understanding part. So that dimension, once you do it, it gives a crucial information about creating an effective training experience. So I know who are coming. If I think of everybody is coming, so I have a reflective learner, I have an active learner, I have a visual learner, I have a verbal learner, I have a sensing learner, I have an intuitive learner, I have a sequential learner, and I have a global learner. So I might create a workshop or create a learning journey where all these things are taken care of. So for example, the visual learner will always prefer doing something over the mobile, micro learning and all these things, whereas the verbal learner would like to listen to podcasts or auditory files. Similarly, an active learner might want to do something in that. Now, if you create a micro learning with all those things put together, you're recognizing the learner dimensions. It also gives you a balanced experience. Now, when I say balanced experience, you're not focusing only on visual, you're not focusing only on verbal, you're not focusing only on a sequential step, you're not focusing only on the global step. You're not only doing active work, you're not only doing reflective work. So let's put a perspective. End of the day, you've created a workshop called leadership for 2 days workshop, right? How will you have a balanced experience? Simple fact. If it has a role plays, simulation, little bit of theory, little bit of doing something on their own, creating some their own, it caters to everything. And most importantly, as a facilitator, you have diverse strategies. It incorporates various strategies that allows educators and facilitators to meet the requirements that students more effectively are willing to learn. So for example, you show a PPT and then suddenly you do a blank screen and you say, okay, what did we see? So you're doing visual, you're doing verbal. When you start the training program, you're saying, this is what the outcome we are trying to achieve after the program is over. It goes to sequential, global, because you'll follow certain steps. You share the agenda. And then you say, what? We'll also do role plays, hands-on. There are few people who will come out, but you also ask the other people how they can reflective learners. So, it gives you a diverse teaching strategies or training strategies where you can work on the dimensions and everything. Now, we understood the model, we understood the every thought processes. Now we are looking at the implementation plan framework. Now, when I say implementation plan framework, what I'm looking at is, how do I set up? At a stature of Richard Felder and Felder-Silverman, who are PhDs in their respective subjects, is it easier for me to establish what they're saying and what they're doing? So what I've tried to do is, I've tried to keep it very simple. And that is what I've done. So the first step is to setting goals and objectives. When I say setting goals and objectives, what I'm saying is, I state the importance of clear goal and I align with learner needs. So the training objectives should align with the learner needs. So let's say the training objective is, what is leadership? What is leadership style all about? What style is the best? What style is the worst? Now I can only focus on this, or I add a line, how can I implement the various leadership styles for various situations. So I am creating a goal or an objective of a program, and then I am aligning it with learner needs. So that has to happen. What it says is, it's because for any purposes, whatever you do, setting a clear goal is as simple as possible. Second, when you're aligning that goal and objectives to the specific need of the learners, you enhance their engagement, you enhance their experience. That is the ideology that we all facilitator looks around us. End of the day, when you think of any perspective that is given a proper way of denomination, your goals and your learner needs has to be aligned. That's what setting goals and objectives are all about. When I'm looking at setting goals and objectives also, I should also look from a contextual relevance. So for example, what is the context? Why am I doing it? What is the thought process? What is the ideology? What is that is applicable? What is that is not applicable? What is that is only theory? What is that is a model? How do I look at the model? So all this context must have a relevance. Otherwise, even if you link the leadership style or the learning objectives to the alignment of the learner needs, but if there is no context as to how this will be applicable to the larger goal of the organization, then the program is just a one-day program. People would come in, enjoy the day as a paid holiday, and once they go back, they will create a thought process of thinking, wow, Gabriel did well, but did it have a context? If no, it stands nowhere. Now, I understood the setting all these things, now developing a step-by-step action plan. When I say action plan, I'm looking at something which is after the program. So a well-structured action plan is crucial for systematic implementation and guides team towards the objectives. So you can create an action plan by simple saying start, stop, do. So whatever you want to start as a new, you should start. Whatever things you thought was going well, but you want to stop now, you stop now, and do or continue that. Whatever you think that what you are doing, you want to continue doing, then put on continue. So you create a simple bracket like this. Another way is a simple 4-column action plan, starting with learner skill. You write down 1 point, implementation timeline, by when you will implement this, what is your mechanism of reviewing, and finally success factors or success indicators. How would you know that you achieved that goal? So see, the action plan, and I can go on. I mean, we can talk about action plan for 1 hour also, whatever the action plans are used. But in this case, we'll keep it very simple. The second step of a good oiled action plan is the systematic implementation. You have to have an organizational skills of implementation, which should ensure that all the strategies are executed efficiently and effectively. If you cannot do it, you can go back and create a dimension from there and link it at that level. See, the end of the day is action plan better, but if it is not systematic implementation, it's not an action plan. You have a formatted action plan with a systematic implementation. It's done, it's effective, it's efficient. And finally, the specific steps. You have to define the specific steps in action plan, helps in tracking progress and making necessary adjustments. Why? Because how will the action plan be implemented? What are the thought processes of the implementation? How you're going to implement it? All this matters. So if I go back again with the thought process of the setting goals of the plan framework, is again setting goals and objectives. Step 1, clear goals. Step 2, alignment with learner needs. Step 3, contextual relevance. So my goal is set. If my goal is set, I'm going to action plan, structured action plan, systematic implementation, and finally specific steps. If you don't have it, you can adjust it, and at the end of the day, when this two goes together, what you get is the resource allocation and timeline. Because otherwise, I've created everything. I've not created a timeline. It will never happen. It is not going to get into that effective way of doing it. You can. So, who will give me the materials? What is the printing timeline? Who are essential for the project? Who are the stakeholders of this project? who are adequately supported out here. All these things matters. Otherwise, what will happen is it's a single one-day program. You will go, deliver, and come back. No model is done. Then establishing a timeline. See, if I go back, resource allocation and then timeline, both goes hand in hand. Managing expectations. So, for example, on the final day of the learning journey, you want to call the, let's say, HOD of that particular team. You just go ahead and send an email without adjusting the timeline. The HOD is much busier. He or she might not have the time to come and have a 15-minute talk. So you have to plan it in advance. Otherwise, it's all becomes a sample program. The implementation part will happen eventually if you do everything. If you do a proper resource allocation with a solid timeline, implementation of any plan, you enhance the overall efficiency. Now, so we spoke about the model, we spoke about the implementation plan. We are coming to evaluating and adjusting the implementation. All right, as we are talking about the Felder-Silverman model, we spoke about the learner needs, we spoke about the evaluation, we spoke about all these things. Now we are coming to the final section, which is evaluating and adjusting the implementation part. Now, please understand, see, as we go along and we try to create an implementation plan, these are the few sections of it which creates that kind of a model, what we do, how we do. Now, in this particular section, I will take you through a little bit of journey understanding of what we can think of. So the first is the outcome based. So the monitoring progress and the outcomes. How we are looking at the monitoring, how will you monitor, whether it will be a 30, 60, 90-day plan, or whether it will be 60, 120 and 180-day plan. So how am I looking at it? It's a 369 plan or it's a 4, 8, 12 plan. See, what we are trying to tell you is it is you who have to decide. Nobody else can decide for you. Nobody else can come into the conjuncture of you thinking that who will decide the monitoring program. At the end of the day, what happens is the ideology is how do you monitor the progress. Now, when you say monitor the progress, if I can do a kind of a imaginary timeline, so if you can look at my hand, so there is an imaginary timeline. So I say week 1, training ABC, what is happening, how it's happening, feedback score. Week 5, so from week 1 to week 5, again, what is happening, trainer feedback score or a scorecard. Now, see, week 1 we did a monitoring, week 5 we are doing a monitoring. So if it's a new hire program, this works. But if I'm doing a leadership workshop, I can't do week 1 and week 5. If not, I have created the journey like that. So if I'm doing a 3-day workshop or a 2-day workshop, on day 1, I might just do a training audit and just check how the program is going. Or I sit through all the days if it's a new facilitator and we try to figure out how these things are happening. We also get into that way of doing things. So see, I'm saying for a new hire training, it can be week 1, week 5, week 7, or week 1, week 3, week 5, week 7. For a normal training program, my monitoring can be, day 1 and day 2. I can understand if day 1 and day 2 goes well and day 3. The context out here is when should we give the feedback? So if I'm monitoring a progress of a learning journey, it is ideal we wait for that review meeting that is supposed to happen, because it's a learning journey. So it's not a 1-day or a 2-day program. It's kind of over a period of time, right? And areas that requirement improvement can be done. Now for a 2-day or a 3-day workshop, if the feedback is really important and we are able to see that the facilitator is unable to engage audience, I might do it then there, because there are more 1.5 days left. So it's up to you. How do you want to monitor the progress? How do you want to go about it? And how do you link it to that actual segment of implementing the strategies? Now, when I say the data for development, what happens is I have taken a bit of data. So let's say there are 4 stages of Kirkpatrick model of training evaluation or impact measurement. So the first is your feedback sheet. So you have collected the feedback sheets, and then you've collected the pre and post. When you look at the pre and post, the outline creates that, this person little movement has happened, this person little movement hasn't happened, so on and so forth. So when you look from that perspective, it gives you a collected data. This collected data will now give you a very, very vital way of going ahead. So what kind of development efforts shall we take? What kind of informed decisions that we take? Whether we continue this program or we break it into other ways. Can we go ahead and do that in other models as well? So the importance of monitoring and the data development and the collected data plays a very pivotal role. Otherwise we might not be able to do it. Now, so if you go back this, we only monitored what is happening and we collected data. Once we are doing this, now we come to the feedback from the learners. Now, when you say feedback from the learners, I don't have to go ahead and tell you the importance of the feedback. So collecting feedback helps understand the students or the learners' learning experiences, identify areas for improvement and teaching strategies. So basically, there are some feedback forms which are 2 pages long. If you ask me what is the context, it's from a company perspective. If they want to collect everything, so they don't they are not there only to collect about trainers' feedback thought process. They're there to collect, what is your learning, how will you implement it, what is your overall program experience, and then they come. So they bifurcate into 3 parts: one the trainer feedback, one the program feedback, and one their learning feedback. So when you do that, you can publish scores from a data analytics point of view in various different points, in various other ways, and in terms of methods of collection, how do I do it? Do I do a survey then and there? Do I do discussions, or do I use feedback method like what colleges, institutes and corporates do? See, it's basically you are asking the learner to express their opinions and suggestions, and actually how did they feel about this program, and what is the learning takeaways from this program. Because you cannot go ahead and tell them right away that you have to do this, you have to do that. You are looking from a perspective of doing this, you are looking at the thought process of doing this. You don't get into the nitty-gritty of all those things. So that ideology is still there. You cannot remove that ideology from that perspective. So at the end of the day, so for example, you got a point that the activities that were done is most from a perspective of reflective or active learners. So for others, they were not able to do so. But they will not, as a learner, give you something. They will just say this activity was not that great, or this activity never happened to me, this activity was not that going forward. The ideology about it is very simple. The end story is that simple, because ideologically or technically, the entire thing gets into that kind of a limelight where you have to take it. Now, whether you take it from survey or typically a verbal feedback, or you allow but it's ultimately the learner's experience based on what they're willing to learn. Now comes the collected feedback, and what will I do with that feedback? So how do I enhance learning? How do I gather that data and think about, okay, this program gave me a feedback of X, that program will give me a feedback of Y. How do I do that? That program will give me an understanding of 1 and 2. How do I do the third part? This gave me an understanding of A and B. How do I do that? See, the ideological thought process is very simple. At the end of the day, you cannot create or you cannot do anything if you don't have a data. You have a data, but you're not effectively using it. It's not effective. So collecting all these things gives you an enhancement. So if you can do a quick recap, the first is, how do I monitor the progress? What are the different ways so that the implement strategies are taken care of? How do I collect the data for development? What are the ways of doing it? That's the idea. Then it goes to the importance of feedback, the methods of collection, the surveys. Do I do a video feedback survey? Do I do an effective feedback survey? Do I get into the notion of that feedback survey? Whatever you do, you can do that. Then comes the learning experience. But if you look at from a channel perspective, every time we speak about, we get into that kind of a notion that what is the learner experience, how the learner gets into that activity, what are the ideological thought processes from that activity. This all takes care of that particular feature. Now, because you have understood the data, because you've understood the learner experience, because you understood the feedback, how do I make those necessary adjustments that will help me to get into that kind of a limelight? That evaluation findings. Okay, I have got a feedback score of 4. Okay, why 4? Why not 5? Why not 3? Why not 3.5? So you have to identify areas that need improvement in the teaching methods. The feedback integration part, we have to incorporate the feedback from the students or the learners who can provide valuable insights for enhancing our instructional strategies. How would I do an instructional strategy? What are the mechanism of doing instructional strategies? What are the ways that you get into that kind of a limelight is more crucial out there. Because see, once again, if I say it right, you have evaluated, you have collected the data, you have integrated the feedback, but if you don't apply, nothing is going to help. You have not collected anything, then also you might not get into the strategic aspect. The way you think or adjusting the instructional strategies is based on that adaptability, the alignment, the learning styles. Because your feedback speaks of all these 3 things. How adaptive was your instructional design? How better alignment was it with the student needs? How good were the learning styles? Because at the end of the day, whatever you do, if these 3 are not met, you will never be able to come into a conclusive way of getting into that highlight. So with that, let us conclude this particular session with a highlight. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is that the Felder-Silverman model provides a structured understanding of diverse learning styles, which helps educators, facilitators, learning managers, learning heads tailor their training teaching methods. It helps you to enhance educational training strategies. When you're implementing the model, that model at the end of the day enables educators and trainers to enhance their strategies so that the learning becomes more effective for all. Students, trainer, learners, students, everyone. The continuous evaluation of the process. If you regularly evaluate the process and the educational outcome, and you ensure that the teaching and training methods remain effective and relevant to the student needs, you have reached there. See, guys, I can go on and on. There is no difference in thinking about it. What I'm trying to tell you guys is, every model that you create, every model that you have has a perspective way of getting into that notion. So to collect as an overall thing, before I conclude today's session, you have to conclude everything. So to recall, 4 domains of learning. How do people or learner process information? The way they process information gives us active and reflective learner. Second, how do learner perceives an information? Gives us 2 separate sets, that is sensing and intuitive. Third, how do learners input information? Visual and verbal. And finally, how do learner understand information in a sequential way or in a global way? And then comes your monitoring, the entire evaluation strategies and everything. When you combine this together, what you get is a brilliant one. So thank you all for spending on this time. If you want to know more or apply anything over a period of time, do reach us to our channel. We'll be glad to help you. Thank you.